Am I good enough? Can I do the work? Will this manuscript ever get finished? Sometimes I do worry about the process of writing. And even though I've finished multiple books before, and those are the ones that I have selling and generating revenue, there is always this fear with you and I as writers that we're not good enough, that the work isn't appropriate, or the way we are constructing our story isn't giving us what the readers will actually need when the book is finished. And so I went back to this book today. It's a book I've sought solace in multiple times over the years since I've had it. It's called An Editor's Advice to Writers, The Forest for the Trees by Betsy Lerner. And I've had this book a long time. If I look at the purchase date, I bought this in 2002, so I've had it 23 years, but it still serves me as a book to drop back into on a regular basis, and I've got plenty of underlinings and markings in the book as I go through it. And the chapter I came back to today is called Chapter 5, The Neurotic. Could you or I be remotely neurotic? It's not just you and I as writers, it's you and I as creators, crafters, makers, the people who generate our income from taking our ideas or our concepts and we put those into whatever it is that we produce. So not just the writers amongst us. Here it says, writers love to worry. By their very nature, we are neurotic and tend to exhibit the gamut of phobic behaviours from nervous tics and insomnia to fully fledged paranoia and delusional episodes. Some writers are hypochondriacal in the extreme, something that may be an extension of their already vivid imaginations or a bid for help and attentions. Betsy says here, and she quotes from a writer, William Gass, who says, I often get very tense working, says novelist and critic William Gass, so I often have to get up and wander around the house. It's very bad on my stomach. My ulcer flourishes, and I have to chew a lot of pills. When my work is going well, I'm usually sort of sick. For other writers, she goes on to comment, the only way to alleviate those ills is to write. William Styron says, when I'm writing, it's the only time that I feel completely self-possessed. Even when the writing itself is not going too well. It's fine therapy for people who are perpetually scared of nameless threats, as I am of most of the time for jittery people. Besides, I've discovered that when I'm not writing, I'm prone to developing certain nervous tics and hypochondria. This last week, while I've been here and actually getting desk time on this particular manuscript, I have struggled. I have been distracted by the internet. I've spent too much time looking at my tracking devices and my journals instead of doing what always works, which is to grab a manuscript and actually work through the document so that I know and I can identify what's missing. And then when I know what's missing, I can grab a notebook, a spiral bound notebook at the moment, and actually write out by hand the scenes that I think are lacking from the story. And also, the more I write, the more I see, okay, this character, I have put them into a certain situation, and by doing so reveal aspects of their character and their tendency to behave in certain ways. But why haven't I done the same with other characters who also ought to have the same level of depth in the story and the same participation in the story, if I don't give them opportunities to express themselves through the ink as I write, I won't get to know who they are. And yet, knowing that that's something I need to do, often I will distract myself with watching some YouTube videos or walking the dog instead of doing the things that I know need to happen and which need to be accomplished. Back to the book. In addition to physical symptoms, people who write tend to develop a set of ritual behaviours with regard to their work. These habits dictate when, where, and under what circumstances they feel able to produce. There are early birds and night owls. I tend to vary towards the late afternoon and the early evening for my writing because for some reason in fact it's not for some reason, this is not a random thing. I know that if I can go to bed having written, I feel far better than if I haven't written. It's almost like it's a contract with myself to say, okay, you can do whatever you want during the day, but you need to put in 500 words later in the day. And knowing that I'm committed to that allows me to enjoy that first part of the day, which is administration or family time or social activity, because I've committed to giving myself those 500 words. If I miss that, I feel awful. I feel very discombobulated, if that's a phrase that we can actually use. I feel slightly uneasy until I know I've nailed those 500 words. Some need a bright cafe to compose, others must steal away to a secluded spot or the equivalent of a safe house where no one knows their identity. Most require solitude. Margaret Duras said, "The person who writes books must always be enveloped by a separation from others. It is the solitude of the author of writing. To begin with, one must ask oneself what the silence surrounding one actually is. With practically every step you take in a house, at every moment of the day, in every kind of light, whether light from outside or from lamps lit in daylight, this real corporeal solitude becomes the inviolable silence of writing. Many," says Betsy Lerner, "such as Styron, require some combination of solitude and community." Styron writes, "I think it would be hard for me on a South Sea island or in the Maine woods. I like company and entertainment, people around. The actual process of writing, though, demands complete noiseless privacy without even music. A baby howling 2 blocks away will drive me nuts." Wow, I can relate to that. I don't know whether you can hear it, but at the moment, in the garden of the house behind us, the gardener is working with a strimmer and cutting down the lawn, ready for more activity. On the balcony, 50 yards from me, over to the right of camera, you can't see it, but there's a lady hanging out the washing, and every now and again she's glancing over at my studio window, kind of nosily thinking, what is that gringo doing upstairs on the top floor with a camera tripod and a lighting system? Who knows? And then when I'm not doing this, or when I was waiting to record the video, the dogs in neighbouring houses were howling and barking at each other. It's just their way of saying hi, good morning, and communicating with each other. And I was waiting for the perfect time to record. Does it happen? I don't know. I do know that I have a habit of writing better in coffee shops and public places than I do writing quietly at my desk. I can edit very well at my desk. I can take a manuscript and work through it and highlight things, cut out lines or paragraphs or just the occasional few words sometimes if I'm lucky. But being out in public and writing in public and paying for a cup of coffee somehow makes me work harder, or it enables me to concentrate better and to overcome those neuroses that I, as a writer, and maybe you as well, we struggle with, or we accept and we tolerate and we use as ways of procrastinating or not proceeding with our given activity. What else have we got? This is a great book. here's a nice bit. And this is a great book. If you haven't seen it, and if you haven't got a copy on the shelf in your office or under your stairs or wherever you write, it's a great book. It's dated, guaranteed, it's 23 years old. But the way that she breaks down the details of the book is really helpful. Let me just take something from an earlier section of the book, if I can. Here we go. This is a section from her introduction. She said, and this is Betsy writing, "When I entered the business," this is as an editor for a big publishing house, "when I entered the business, I believed that writers were exalted beings. How else could they capture in a single phrase the emotional truth of a lifetime, or render a scene that seemed more lifelike than life? How else could they risk their lives and livelihoods on a string of sentences, bearing their souls in a world ever more hostile to artists and art? I was in awe of all writers, even those with less than perfectly realised books. They had broken through, and somewhere books existed with their names on them. Of course, she says, it didn't take long for those pedestals to crumble. We do think of other artists, of other writers as being better than us, more productive, of having a higher quality of output or a more prolific level of production of their written work. And I still do that, even though I realise that, having had conversations with so many other fellow writers, they are just like you and I, generally, by overcoming that process of procrastination and thinking, oh, I need to read a book on, I don't know, what have I got here? I need to dip into a book on giants and mythology because that's something that I'm thinking about for another title. Or I need to re-ink my fountain pens. These are all just excuses and avoid the actual thing that we need to do, which is to write. Lerner says here, before I entered publishing, I believed, like most people, that the life of a writer was to be envied. As one of my heroes, Truman Capote, wrote, when God hands you a gift, he also hands you a whip. Now, I understand that writers are a breed apart and their gifts and their whips inextricably linked. The writer's psychology is by its very nature one of extreme duality. The writer, you and I, labours in isolation, yet all that intensive, lonely work is in the service of communicating. It is an attempt to reach another person. It isn't surprising then that many writers are ambivalent, if not altogether neurotic, about bringing their work forward. For in so doing, a writer must face down that which he or she most fears, rejection. There is no stage of the writing process that doesn't challenge every aspect of a writer's personality. How well writers deal with those challenges can be critical to their survival. Every now and again, friends in writing groups or in some of the Facebook groups for authors and self-publishers that I participate in, they say to me, Nick, you're so lucky that you've written 9 books. Or Nick, I don't know how you can manage to write 9 books. Listen, I've written 9 books over 20 years. That's hardly a significant output. In fact, it's a very low output, but it puts food on the table. It allows me to have contributions from my written output to pay bills. And it also, I think, opens doors to other people and to communities of creative people, because I can say, this is me, I have written, what have I got on the table? I've written this book, for example, Meaningful Work, and it may be useful to you. You can buy a copy, you can read it, you can review it, and I believe you'll find it useful. Having that is an amazing door opener. And my very first book, which was called Buying to Rent, and I wrote for the Financial Times, that book opened so many doors and generated so many opportunities for our family that I continue to be grateful for the legacy of that book. But remember what Betsy Lerner just said. She said, there is no stage of the writing process that doesn't challenge every aspect of the writer's personality. How well writers deal with those challenges can be critical to their survival. And it's those comments that I get in writing groups or in my role with the Nottingham Writers Studio on the management team there, helping people find a place to write, helping people get that sense of belonging to a community of artists and creatives as writers. It's how we rise to that challenge that makes all the difference. I see too many individual writers who are holding on to the perspective that it is difficult and it's almost worth staying in the difficulty, because to push forward and to accomplish that let's call it a project, but in actual fact it begins as a dream to say, I am a published author. I have such and such a book available for the public. That process, sometimes it's easier to push it away and to constantly be in the struggle rather than be in the easy position or the pleasant position of having books to market and to promote and to share with your potential audience. Again, I'm going to repeat it because it's important. There is no stage of the writing process that doesn't challenge every aspect of the writer's personality. How well writers deal with those challenges can be critical to their survival. I started this video by talking about how I found it difficult to be productive this last week. I always think that I will get on a plane, fly to England or Mexico, and settle at my desk and put out 1,000 or 2,000 words every day. It doesn't actually happen that way. What tends to happen is I will open a notebook or I will jot down some ideas. Last night my wife had gone to bed. One of the guests in this particular house where we have an Airbnb operation was having dinner, and they'd got headphones on and were listening to music, and I was able to grab my notebook and start writing and think about the gaps in the story and think about what I would like to do with those gaps by populating them with connecting bridges between one chapter and something else that I've written confidently and feels, at least to me, very easy and smooth. But there is no connection there. There's no bridge from one action or one activity to the next one where I want to explain or to reveal through conversation something that I now need the reader to understand has happened to move the story forward. But if I'd not sat down last night, if I'd gone straight to bed, I would have felt slightly awkward about the process of what was lacking in the story. So just having a little bit of time to add those notes and those ideas, that made for a good evening. Think about where you are with your project and think about what it is that you can do, and use books like this. Use things like, I've got another one here what I found very helpful earlier in the week. Use them as tools and resources, because you can't do everything on your own, even though to the outside world it looks as though you've come up with this idea and you've developed it and you've expanded it and you've packaged it beautifully. But it does take lots of other people. So that's the Editor's Advice to Writers by Betsy Lerner. This edition is published by McMillan. I'm sure they still own the rights to and still actively produce that book. But here's another one, How to Write Crime Fiction by Sarah Williams. This is one of those few non-fiction books that I've read cover to cover over the course of a single weekend, and I really, really enjoy it. It's got lots of my markings in it, where I've underlined sections that I found helpful, or where I've put, maybe I've got some asterisks in here. What I've done here is I've highlighted or I've marked 3 significant paragraphs that really nailed something for me and made things clearer. How to Write Crime Fiction by Sarah Williams, this one published by Little Brown. So find a way forward, find a way through your own neurosis and the things that are part of your makeup that stop you from being productive and active, and actually get on with your project, which is to say to yourself, I want to write a new book or a first book or a continuation of a series, and get on with it. Because at the end of the day, you don't have a book until you have a finished book. And then you have a manuscript that is ready for an editor, which leads to another series of amendments or slight changes or twists to the way that you explain your story through the plots that you create. And finally, you do end up with a book that exists with your name on the cover, as this example, and allows you to say, I have finished my book, I have created something which I have delivered to the world, Now, the world can absorb it while I market it and promote it, but your job is now to get on with the next book.